Now, a News 2 special presentation. Honoring Black History. Sponsored locally by Joy Law Firm.
Since 1891, children have been taken in and taken care of by the founder and staff of Jenkins Orphanage, now known as Jenkins Youth and Family Village. The mission has always been to educate and empower young people. 133 years later, the music and mission are still a part of the Jenkins legacy.
Back in the 1920s, my father was the superintendent of the Jenkins Orphanage.
2 decades later, in the 1940s, Dr. Ben Chavis says he was enraptured in the sounds of music that were unlike anything he'd ever heard.
The Jenkins band, the Jenkins Orphanage band, was world-renowned. The brass band, no one had ever seen brass instruments improvised. The improvisation of the Jenkins Orphanage band actually was helped the evolution of jazz in America.
It was the late 1940s. Chavis was a child himself.
I was born in 1948. So during the late 40s, early 50s, I would come to Jenkins Orphanage. And I was always so impressed with the high aspirations of these orphans.
But unlike Chavis, who was in the care of his own parents, the children in the Jenkins band had been living in the streets.
Challenge, but music compensated for their challenge. Music compensated for their poverty.
Orphan black children rescued from the streets of Charleston by Daniel Joseph Jenkins, a formerly enslaved man who became a minister and a businessman. Reverend Jenkins is said to have boldly asked the all-white Charleston City Council to use a warehouse next to the City of Charleston jail to establish an orphanage on King Street. The council members said yes, and the orphanage was established in 1891.
The truth is, the quality of life of the orphans at Jenkins Orphanage was very high quality. Reverend Jenkins made sure they had everything. Good clothes, good shoes, good textbooks. I met young people that were speaking Greek, were translating the New Testament into Greek. I mean, this is a story that's really not told, because a lot of times when people think of orphanages, they think of people who are less fortunate. But I would say that the orphans that attended Jenkins Orphanage were very fortunate to have a founder like Mr. Jenkins.
The Jenkins Orphanage Band played all over the world. They played at the inauguration of President Theodore Roosevelt and President William Taft. They performed during the St. Louis World's Fair. They toured the country extensively through the 1910s and 1920s, playing shows from coast to coast. They even played in Paris, Berlin, Rome, London, and Vienna. The grandson of the founder of Jenkins Orphanage, Tuffa Zimbabwe, talked about his family's legacy. What did you know about your family's history growing up as a child?
Yeah, my father would tell me of our great-grandfather, Reverend Daniel Joseph Jenkins, and all the great accomplishments he was able to do, and how we have to come to Charleston and visit family and campus and learn the history. And also he would talk about his uncle, which is Edmund Thornton Jenkins, and how he would want me to work on his music.
Bobway's interpretation of his great uncle, Edmund Thornton Jenkins' composition, Charlestonia Rhapsody, was featured during the 2024 Color of Music Festival. The piece is considered one of the greatest musical tributes to Jenkins' hometown of Charleston. And Zimbabwe knows about music and bands. He is the keyboardist for the Saturday Night Live house band. He talked about getting his big break on SNL when he connected with a professor at NYU.
I developed a good reputation in the department, as, a guy who does his work and is on time and, has talent and potential. So he said, oh, give this guy the toughest audition. And then I played some of my Chopin, and then I played some jazz and played some of the funk. All the different skills that I was able to accumulate, made it an ideal fit for me.
Dr. Karen Chandler is the co-founder of the Charleston Jazz Initiative, a jazz history and research project that documents the careers of South Carolina musicians who helped shape music history in America and Europe.
When we started the Charleston Jazz Initiative in 2003, we knew that we had a responsibility to document the history for us of jazz in Charleston, the history of so many great musicians who came out of the Jenkins Orphanage and went on to play with Count Basie and Jimmy Lunsford and Duke Ellington and so many of the big band leaders. What we did not know is, when we first got started, is that there would be a composer whose name was Edmund Thornton Jenkins, who was both a classically trained composer and who also composed jazz and popular music as well. And so here we are celebrating his musical legacy.
Dr. Ben Chavis, a trailblazer for human, civil, and environmental justice as the field director for the Million Man March and the former executive director of the NAACP, says the memory of the Jenkins Orphanage Band have guided his steps professionally and personally. He says their story is history.
Every time I hear jazz, I think about the Jenkins Orphanage Band. Being back in 2024 reminded me that difficulties or even obstacles that may be put in your path, you can not only transcend those obstacles, but you can still do something great. So I think that this part of the world, this part of South Carolina, this is part of history. It's just not, I know this is Black History Month, but I tell people all the time, Black history is American history. And what happened at the Jenkins Orphanage is American history.